Welcome to our Creating a Culture of Innovation series. My name is Michael Thied. I work with CEIBS here in Shanghai. Today we have a very special episode of our show for a number of reasons. First, because Professor of Leadership Juan Fernandez, who is usually the host of our show, is actually seated in one of our guest spots today. But secondly, because he has also brought with him Professor of Organizational Behavior Emily David. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Our focus for today is the recently released SEIBS 2021 Innovation Survey that both of you have been working on. So I'll jump straight in with my first question. What is the survey and where did you get the idea to launch this project?
I published a previous book last year, China CEO 2, and in that book we interviewed, together with my co-author Laura Underwood, 25 CEOs of multinationals. From that work and conversation with these CEOs, we saw that many things have changed in China. Chinese consumers becoming more demanding. The Chinese competitors are getting stronger, and all the digital revolution. On top of that, you add the COVID-19, and you see that innovation is becoming even more important than before. If you want to survive in China, in this market, and probably in other markets, you need to innovate. You cannot stop. Otherwise, they will eat your market. You will, in the long run, have a slow death.
And so this is a part of a bigger project. So the survey itself, we surveyed over 950 people, really high-level people. So over 80% are VP level and above. About 3/4 are men. They come from pretty big companies. So we see about 40% from companies with more than 2,000 employees. But the survey is just one part. So the overall project that we're working on with Juan and with Sophie, we also are conducting 28 interviews, both in English and in Chinese, with people who are working in these really innovative companies. And now we're in the process that's kind of the exciting part of compiling it into a book that we hope to get out this year.
According to your survey, are there certain types of organizations that are more innovative than others?
Yeah, for sure. So we were lucky to get a wide response of different industries from the respondents. And we tend to find that the smaller companies tend to be more innovative. And we also find that certain industries report more innovation. So for example, the healthcare and the services sector had really high levels, whereas other sectors like the energy and finance sectors had comparatively less innovation.
Okay, so you've already just mentioned industries, but similarly, did you find that organizations at different growth stages approached innovation differently?
Clearly, there is a difference. Yeah? As Emily mentioned before, startups are innovative by nature. Yeah? They are creative, they try new things, and the founders are people that are very adaptable, very open. I remember we interviewed one of these startups. Now it's not a startup, it's already a unicorn. But he told me that he didn't have an individual office. He just sits with the rest of the employees. At the moment, he has 4,000 employees in the company. Everybody can talk to him, very open, very flexible, and ideas can flow freely. Yeah? Now, when companies grow, clearly they need to create systems. They create the structures. The HR department, finance department, perhaps because the size of the organization, they have offices, meeting rooms, and a little bit of this silo mentality can emerge. On the other side, you have the big organizations in China, the state-owned enterprises. Yeah? Recently, I finished a course with a big bank, 400,000 employees. Wow. I mean, those are the size of a city, yeah? And of course, those guys have a very solidified structures with a lot of rules, regulations, norms. For those companies, it's more difficult, more challenging to be innovative, although they are trying, but it's more challenging.
When it comes to factors like organizational policies or leadership priorities or employee norms, how important did you find that these factors are in driving innovation?
When we formulated the survey, we came up with what we call an innovation index, and it has those three parts in it. So the organizational policies and practices, what the leader signals are the priorities in terms of innovation, what they reward in terms of employee behaviors, and then also the day-to-day things like whether or not people can dissent against the prevailing opinions, whether or not they're free to experiment. And what we found is that actually the employee index was the one that was the highest. So these kind of day-to-day day-to-day things that employees are doing, people said that they're doing a lot more of those compared to the organizational policies and the leadership kinds of things, which will be interesting when we see later in the priorities. But also what we saw that was kind of interesting with regards to these three factors is that upper level managers tended to rate all three of those types of innovation as much higher, that they were doing more of those kinds of innovation than the lower level managers. So we saw a difference there in terms of the survey results.
My next question is for Juan. In previous episodes of the Creating a Culture of Innovation series, you've actually talked a lot about some of the things that companies are doing to promote or foster a culture of innovation in the workplace. So can you give us some examples of how they're going about doing that?
One of the interviews I had, although it's not on the air, it was a Zoom interview, was with the former president of 3M China, Kenneth Yu. He was president for more than 60 years, I think. And he talked about leadership at 3M. And what surprised me, how open, how easy is to communicate across levels in 3M. And it's not depending on the type of person that occupies the job, it's because it's part of the culture. And that is a critical difference. I mean, you can have organizations that you have a leader that is more open, and then all of a sudden become easier to communicate with him or her, or less open. In organizations like 3M, it's part of the culture. And he told me, said, if somebody has an idea at any level of the organization, nobody will never stop that person. And it's nothing to do with me, it's 3M culture. That's a good example of what I mean, but a company that really has the innovation as part of the DNA. Another example, and this is one of the interviews we have on air, is with the CEO of Apple. And she talked a lot about purpose in the organization. And this is another aspect, is you need to attract certain talent to the company. Yeah. And having a purpose-based organization attracts certain type of people. Of course, you have to nurture them, and these are the people that will have the initiatives, the ideas that you require for innovation. So it's not only leadership, it's also the talent and how you treat, what type of people you attract to the organization. And then one of the other videos that we have in the series is about Intel. And I think that the interview with Dr. Peng, he was clear that Intel has systems in place that foster, create this innovation culture. So I think there are three good examples of this innovation index that we have in the survey.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, which is, are these types of stories or examples sort of consistent with the results that you saw from the survey that you did?
Yes and no. So what we found is when we asked people for what they are actually doing in their organization, so the types of innovative practices that they see in their companies today, they said things like new products, they said things like new service improvements, or even management style improvements. So a lot of the things they said were kind of very big picture. And even when we asked them, okay, what in an ideal world, so maybe not what they're doing in their organizations, but what do they think is important? It was still these kind of big picture kind of policies and practices, whereas they didn't talk so much about retaining talent or about empowering people or about giving feedback to different kinds of people. These day-to-day things with the employees on the front line that we find through the interviews really drive innovation. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there. One of the funnier things that came out of the survey, one guy, because we had an open box, if they didn't see the different practices that they saw in their organization, we allowed them to input what they did see. Okay. And one guy said, it's me, they hired me to be the innovation. And so he said, I'm supposed to single-handedly do it. And he said, my mouth is parched, I'm so tired of trying to do this. And I think it really talks to him. We ended up interviewing him later on, and he ended up leaving the company actually. And I think this is really one of the dangers, is that you can't put it just on HR, or you can't put it on one external person to drive innovation. You really have to engage everyone to be part of it. And that's part of the challenge, I think, and some of that disconnect, maybe that's where it's coming from.
In terms of outcomes, what are the types of things that organizations can expect to gain from fostering innovation in their organization?
So one of the cool things I think that came out from the survey is that we were actually able to correlate whether companies that say that they're doing a lot of these innovative practices, whether that is related to their attitudes towards innovation, and we found that it was. So companies that have more innovation, their employees tend to value innovation more, which is pretty straightforward. But the really exciting one was that we saw that people who were working for really innovative companies were actually much, much less likely to want to leave that organization. So we found it could be a great tool for retention, which of course is a huge problem facing a lot of Chinese organizations.
Well, one of the points that we want to convey in this research and our next book is that innovation is not a one-time thing you do. You know, many companies said, okay, let's do be more digital. Fine, that's not bad. That's not bad. And that's also innovation, yeah? Innovation is not only launching new products, it's also transforming the organization. That's also part of the innovation. Innovation for us is something that has to be sustained along the time. It's not a one-time thing because now is what we have to do. How you bring innovation as part of the life of the organization, the normal being of the organization. And that is the reason we want to touch critical points like the leadership style, the talent management, and the systems in the organization. And these three things, they have to work together.
Okay, so again, a question for Juan. According to some of the previous interviews that you did, what were some of the other types of outcomes that executives that you spoke with sort of expected to see associated with innovation?
Let's first talk about what we mean by innovation, yeah? There is an innovation that is incremental innovation, so it's improving what you already have. And I think most of the organizations are quite good at doing these type of things. But the important innovation is that innovation that is beyond the expectations of the consumer. That's the difficult one. We have cases like Apple. They were very good doing that type of things. And some organizations are excellent. They are great examples of Chinese companies as well, yeah? It's not only foreign companies that are doing well in this area, yeah? So how to reach that extra innovation that surprises the consumer, that goes beyond to what the consumers expect. And I think that when you have innovation as part of your DNA, of your systems, your behaviors in the organization, there are more chances that you reach this type of innovation. That would be the most important outcome.
So we've talked a little bit about what happens when companies start to innovate or when they are innovating. But what about the other side of the coin? What are some of the reasons that companies start innovating in the first place?
Yeah, so I think especially kind of as Juan mentioned in the beginning, these companies, especially the big state-owned companies or companies that are just starting to do this for the first time, like any kind of organizational change, you have to create a burning platform. Like, why is this necessary? And so as part of the survey, what we really wanted to look at was what is the biggest impetus or what's the biggest motivation that says you need to do innovation? Why is it important for the success of your company? And some of the answers we got were mostly related to kind of grabbing or retaining their market share. So things like touching new market segments in a local market, not internationally. Things like getting a first mover advantage, taking advantage of new technologies. So we saw that especially for the local Chinese companies, they were really focused on the competition kind of aspect to it. So we didn't see a whole lot, again, of an emphasis on retaining top talent or these kind of things were less emphasized. But this was something that in future iterations of the survey, I'm excited to see if it changes as we see more and more companies kind of moving out of China and competing internationally.
When companies do decide that they need to be more innovative, what are some of the challenges that they typically face?
Well, there are important barriers to innovation, yeah? Of course, there are some inertia in the organization, especially if we talk about big organizations. They are more challenging than small organizations. Those by nature are more adaptable, yeah? But probably the company culture, which is the most difficult thing to change. You can change your website. You can start selling online. This is a relatively easy things to do because are more technical, but it's when you want to change the mindset of the people. And that has to start by the leaders. Yeah? And unfortunately, many times the leaders, they say, yeah, we need innovation. This is what we have to do. And then they look down at the middle and say, you guys, innovate. And they think that's enough. And it's not enough. They do some training, they do some courses and new computers. It's not enough. It's changing the mindset of the organization. That's the most challenging part. And sometimes, as the example that Emily was giving, they hire somebody. Yeah. They say, okay, teach us to be innovative. But what happened in this organization is that they produce antibodies. And they do everything they can to kill this guy, to expel him or her from the system, yeah? And they manage to do it. So it's not just having one champion or one superhero in the organization to make the change. No, it's more than that. It's more challenging.
Finally, I have just one more question. I think one of the most surprising or interesting things that's actually come out of your survey is the fact that while most people reported that they think innovation is important for their organization, there were actually those people who thought that maybe innovation wasn't important to begin with. So can you explain a little bit more about this?
Yeah, we were a little surprised too. And to be clear, 96% of people said that it is important for and is critical for the success of the organization. But we had some fun digging deeper into that minority population that said, okay, maybe it is important, but it's not the most important thing. So in terms of kind of demographic factors, we found that they tended to be lower level managers or mid-level managers rather than the top guys. They more likely came from privately owned Chinese companies, and they came from sectors such as manufacturing, services, consumer goods, and energy. So these were the top four that we had respondents. The best stuff was when we asked them, well, why? Why is it that you think this? And they gave us a ton of different answers. So one popular answer was, well, basically tradition is more important. Consistency is more important. Maintaining our culture is more important. My favorite answer was, my industry has been doing the same thing for 400 years. Why change now? We got a lot of other stuff. They said things like other factors are more important. So connections, like Guanxi is more important. The leader's vision and capability is more important. Or some people were a little more blunt and they said, well, it's just more important to survive. So those were some of the answers that we got about why, even if it is important, it is in a lot of cases too risky, too costly, and it's just not something we're doing right now.
Not everybody agrees with that. Depends in what type of organization, what type of business, and the stage in life you are, yeah? I mean, if you have a big family and you are close to retirement, probably innovation is not your first priority, yeah? So it comes more with the generations. And you see that in China, there is a new generation. We can see it in CIBS, in our MBA. They are innovative, they have ideas, and they want to create something different, yeah? It's a strong force, not only, I think, in CIBS, in the whole country.
So on that note, the CIBS 2021 Innovation Survey is available now. So we'll provide a download link for that in the description for this video. Other than that, thank you both again for your time today.
Yeah, it's in English and Chinese. They can get two languages.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much for having us.
Okay,
Thank you.